share something with you from the New York Times. In a sprawling tent encampment in Gaza, the Israeli bombs fall close enough to hear and feel. But daily life is also a struggle against hunger, cold, and a growing sanitation crisis. A lack of toilets and clean water, as well as open sewage, are problems that displaced Palestinians have struggled with since the early days of Israel's assault. For 2 months after that assault, Salwa al-Masri, who is 75, and her family fled to the city of Rafah at the southernmost tip of Gaza to escape Israel's military offensive. She said she would walk 200 yards to reach the nearest bathroom. If she was lucky, younger women in line would let her jump ahead. Other times, she might wait an hour to use a dirty toilet shared by thousands of other people. It's horrible, Ms. Al-Masri said via video feed recently from her family's ramshackle tent, which was made out of wood and plastic sheeting. She said, "I wouldn't drink water. I would stay thirsty so I wouldn't have to go to the bathroom. I stopped drinking coffee and tea," end quote. Many other Gazans already facing hunger and thirst as a result of Israel's more than 4-month-long siege of the territory say they, too, have tried to cut back on eating and drinking, even more to avoid an uncomfortable and unsanitary visit to the toilet. Recently, Mrs. Al-Masri's son and other relatives bought a cement toilet basin and dug a hole behind their tent where the sewage gathers. It is a closer toilet and one she shares with fewer people. But the challenges of getting water to wash with and of the accumulating sewage are threatening their health, and the stench of the sewage fills their encampment. Last month, the World Health Organization reported that cases of hepatitis A had been spreading in Gaza. It also said there were several thousand people with jaundice, which is caused by hepatitis A, among other conditions. Cases of diarrhea among children have also skyrocketed. All of it is linked to poor sanitation. The Director General of the World Health Organization wrote on social media, quote, "The inhumane living conditions, barely any clean water or clean toilets, or the possibility to keep their surroundings clean will enable hepatitis A to spread further." And it highlights how explosively dangerous the environment is for the spread of disease, end quote. Continuing with this Times article, it says, prominent epidemiologists have estimated that an escalation of the war in Gaza could cause up to 85,000 Palestinian deaths over the next 6 months from injuries, disease, and lack of medical care, in addition to the nearly 35,000 that local authorities have already reported since early October. Schools, hospitals, mosques, and churches have been overcrowded shelters for Palestinians seeking safety from Israeli airstrikes until they too are bombed. The few available bathrooms have to be shared among hundreds or thousands of people who sometimes wait in lines for hours to relieve themselves. Israel's bombardment of Gaza and the accompanying ground offensive have increasingly pushed Palestinians south into the overcrowded corner of Gaza around Rafah and forced them to erect makeshift tents. As a result, access to toilets and sanitation has only worsened. Some 1.5 million displaced Palestinians are now in Rafah. more than half of Gaza's total population of 2.2 million, even as Israel threatens to invade that area. After the Hamas-led attacks on October 7th, Israel's near-complete siege on Gaza has prevented most things from coming into the territory, creating a dire shortage of food, water, medicines. Additionally, representatives of both UNICEF and the Palestinian Red Crescent Society said their organizations have tried to bring in portable toilets and materials to build sanitation facilities, but the Israeli authorities prevented them. A UNICEF manager for the Palestinian program said, quote, "It is a public health concern. But the second thing is simply just dignity. It is something we take for granted, but it's really how we are taking dignity away from these people." End quote. And so it continues. And again, if you have seen some of the videos from Gaza, it has now reached that point for me, and I mentioned this last week, or maybe the week before. It's now reached that point for me where the revulsion that I feel toward the government of Netanyahu is approaching the same revulsion I felt against the operators of the death camps in Poland and Germany and Czechoslovakia and Eastern Europe, where 6 million Jews were executed. It's the same revulsion to think that after all the violence to each other that we humans have done, and specifically after all the horror that the Jews have gone through, that in the state of Israel, they would allow themselves to be led by what by any definition has become a bloodlusted madman who continues the slaughter, continues the bombing. To what end? Hamas leadership is not there, and it hasn't been. It's in Syria and Lebanon and Iran and Iraq and probably in Saudi Arabia or Yemen. If I know that, and you know that, and news media know that, are we to believe that Netanyahu doesn't know that? Netanyahu is by his actions showing himself to be a bloodthirsty, maniacal fucking killer, a murderer, someone apparently for whom nothing becomes a barrier to continue slaughtering innocent people day after day, hour after hour. I have, going all the way back to the first Intifada, going back to the 67 war, my emotions as an American have shifted this way and then that way and then this way until I fully understood what the Palestinian people had to go through during what they called the Nakba in 1948, the establishment of the State of Israel, the appropriation of entire villages, people being murdered, Palestinians being murdered, run off their land, the same thing we did to Native Americans here, the same thing Europeans did in Australia, the same thing Europeans did in Canada, the same goddamn thing. But we're 300 years past that, aren't we? No, we're not. We're not past it. But going all the way back to my understanding of Israel-Palestine, and where I could feel my emotions shifting first to the Israelis, then to the Palestinians, and then back to the Israelis, and then back to the Palestinians, just back and forth, back and forth. But now, after this, never again. Isn't that what the Jews promised themselves after what happened in Europe? With the culmination of that brutality and butchery and murder against Jews culminating in the death camps of World War II, never again. Isn't that what the Jews have been saying? Isn't that what the Israeli government is based on? Never again. What are the Palestinian people supposed to say? And I'm wondering how much longer. There are upwards of 1 million Palestinian refugees in encampments in Jordan. There are hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in Lebanon. There are 2 million still in what used to be Gaza. How much longer is it going to be before these millions of people, just like the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto in Poland, who eventually, after absorbing all the horror that they could from the Nazis, rose up knowing that they did not have a chance, but they slaughtered enough Nazis in an attempt to free themselves from what had been done to them. So my question is, and I think about this a lot, at what point will the Palestinians who are not dead, the Palestinians who have lost everything several times, who've lost family members and then more family members and homes and businesses and dignity and a goddamn fucking toilet, how much longer before they say they don't care what the expense is? You want a suicide in front of the Israeli embassy in D.C. with a man pouring gasoline over him? We will show you suicide. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. You know, the Progressive Voices Network brings you commercial-free commentary from today's leading progressive radio hosts and pundits, like me, Mike Malloy, 24 hours a day. I'm not your typical old guy from the 80s or the 90s talk radio host, and Progressive Voices is not your typical talk radio network. It's a listener-supported nonprofit with no corporate control whatsoever over our broadcast. So hosts like me, Mike Malloy, are free to rant and scream and carry on about whatever we like. We're often controversial, but we're never boring. Weeknights, 9 p.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in the West on the Progressive Voices Network. Always progressive, always on. I'm Mike Malloy. Keep it lit.